Good morning. For those of you who are not familiar with my work, he just listed the books that I have. It's a total of 3 New Mexico Book Awards, total of 5 finalists. All of those are available on the back table this evening. I've been around Southwest writers a little less off than on for about 15 years. Been out for about the past 4, just taking care of some other areas of my life that required some of my attention. But I'm delighted to be back today, and I'll be talking about how to create characters that your reader can buy into as actual real people, that your reader can relate to and perhaps even like. And so in order to do that, your characters have to be multidimensional, whatever that means. So to me, that means that they have to have flaws as well as virtues. They have to have internal struggles as well as external conflict, and they have to have past lives and prior relationships. And this is particularly important, the past lives and prior relationships, because it is their past that make them who they are in your story's present. It is their past that have determined and defined their character and justify their actions, their behaviors. It is their past that determines how they will respond to their circumstances and to their emotions. And so that's the topic of today. And so I'm going to talk about basically how to create the characters with enough breadth and enough depth and enough level of detail and enough individuality that they'll come across to the reader as real. And so I'm an engineer by training and trade, hence my bent towards science fiction as a genre. And I did a lot of technical writing before I branched into fiction. And so as a technical guy, I tend to think of things and process things in terms of lists. And so what I'm going to give you today is I'm going to give you basically a laundry list of things to think about when you're developing your characters, when you are creating your characters, that you might not otherwise realize that you need to consider. Things that will help to create detail and create some individuality for your characters. And so I'd encourage you as I go through these things to just write down this list if you're taking notes. If you're not, you can get it in the book at the back of the table at the end of the talk. So here we go. First thing you need to think about is to give each character a unique set of physical traits. Now these don't have to be scars and tattoos and birthmarks, the things that really make your character unique within the context of all humanity. You can do that. But that's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about making your character physically unique within the context of your story. Because as your reader is reading the story, they're going to try to visualize your characters. They're going to form an image of your character in their mind. And so if all of your characters look alike, or are described as looking alike, or the individualities of your characters are not described, then the reader is going to see them all in their mind the same and have a hard time keeping them apart. And going to have a hard time believing that they're real people if they all seem the same. And so think about how you can individualize your character's physical traits within the context of the story. And these could be simple things. Here's some examples. In my first science fiction novel, Chase Morgan, he is a 58-year-old African-American man. He's my protagonist, he's my hero. And he is not the only African-American man in the book, but he is the only African-American man that is prominent in the story. He's 58 years old, so he's got gray hair, he's got facial hair, he's got a gray mustache and a gray beard. He's not the only character with gray hair. He's not the only character with facial hair, but he's the only character with gray facial hair. And so as my reader is visualizing this character, he's the only prominent character I have who's an African-American with gray facial hair. And so that's going to individualize him in the mind of the reader. Other simple things that you can do, Stanley Brower, he's the security chief in the same story. I wanted to give him kind of a striking appearance, maybe even a little bit of a disturbing appearance, so I gave him some very light colored eyes. They look gray. They're actually light blue, but they look gray. And so that gives him a little bit of a disturbing appearance, which is kind of a thing I was going for with his character. Other ones, Kelly Baker, she's the hero in Venus Rain, my second sci-fi. She is a teenager, kind of rebellious by nature. She has bleached blonde, very, very platinum colored hair with neon pink highlights. So that's unique to her in the context of that story. Her brother Rod, she's got a little brother, who's 9 years old. He's the only child that's prominent in the story. So that's a unique physical characteristic for him. He's also got a physical handicap that shows up in the book as well. So that's unique to him. Colonel Chang, he's the bad guy. He's in the same book. He's the villain, and he has his unique physical trait is he's got scarring across one side of his face that's from the explosion of a chemical grenade that he experienced earlier in his military career. So that's a unique physical trait for him. Book 3, Mercury's Son. One of my main characters in there is a woman named Anna, and she is exceedingly short. She's about 4 feet tall. And so that's unique to her within the context of my story. So all different kinds of simple things that you can do, 1 or 2 things for each character that make them unique in their physical appearance from every other character. Number 2, give each character a unique style of speech. We all speak differently. If all of your characters speak like you speak, then none of them are going to seem real. You can make one speak like you speak. But think about when you're developing a speech style for your character, think about the fact that we all have a unique combination of dialect and vocabulary, sentence structure, those kinds of things that stem out of who we are. So based on our age, based on our personality, our level of education, the region or country in which we grew up, our socioeconomic background, the time period in which we live, and even our gender, all of those things flavor the words that come out of our mouth and give us a unique speech style. And so these don't have to be widely varying speech styles. They certainly can be as long as they all fit together in the same world and are explained through the character's background. But they don't have to be. They can be subtly different. I want to just read an example here. This is the opening paragraphs of my fantasy novel, in which I have 2 different characters here who have 2 distinctly different speech styles. So I just want you to notice as I'm reading this, the differences in the speech styles of these 2 characters. Nicklin Mirren frowned at the old woman. It was late in the day, and her wagon was still laden with wares. 3. He held the copper coins open in his open palm. Seeing them would make her want them all the more. A half-pound jug of raw honey sat on the barrel between them. 4. She thrust out her chin, and her eyes hardened in her wrinkled face. You sold me the same size jug for 3 last month. Long winter, you pay 4. I can't afford 4. I still have things to buy. I tell you what, the old woman said after a moment's hesitation. You buy full pound, I give you for 6. Nick guffawed. I don't have 4. What makes you think I can pay 6? But the old woman stood firm. She might have been a statue carved from a tree stone. Nick knew the type, and he'd been on the opposite end of the sale often enough to know that she wasn't as needy as she claimed to be. He glanced again at her brimming wagon. Ah, forget it. Like you said, it's been a long winter. Honey's a luxury we can't afford. After pocketing his coins, he walked across the packed earth aisle of the Cedar Falls weekend market and examined cooking utensils in the tent there. Utensils he had no intention of buying. When he emerged a few minutes later, the old woman held up the honey and waved Nick back to her. You buy something every week. I tell you what. Today, I give you half pound for 3. Free, Nick said, playing the game. 3, 3, she poked 3 bony digits into the air. You pay 3. Nick scrubbed his chin. He'd already told her he didn't need the honey. He could probably talk her down to 2, but that wouldn't leave her much coin to live on. All right. He surrendered the copper and stuffed the jug into his bulging pack. Next time 4, she shouted as he walked away. So what can you tell me about the speech styles of these 2 characters? What did you notice about the old woman's speech style? So staccato? Yeah? She doesn't put together complete sentences, does she? I don't think there's a single complete sentence in her entire dialogue. What about Nick? What about him? What did you notice about his?
Introspective.
Introspective? Okay. What else?
Level of education.
His level of education was higher. Would it surprise you to learn that he is literate?
No.
No, we do learn later in the book that he's literate. How about the woman? Would it surprise you to find out that she's literate? Yeah, it would. And we don't actually see her again. This is the only scene she appears in. But yeah, the reader should be surprised to find out that she's literate. I did not develop her as a literate character. So what else about Nick's style? It's kind of casual, isn't it? And he speaks full sentences. I think every single sentence in there is a complete sentence. So just these two lines of dialogue. She says, I tell you what, you buy full pound, I give you for 6. And he responds, I don't have 4. What makes you think I can pay 6? If I were to assign one of those lines of dialogue to the other character, you'd recognize that it's out of place, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So strive to achieve that in your writing as you develop the speech styles for your characters. And just as a demonstration of how important this can be in establishing your character through their speech style, I want to do a little bit of exercise here. I'm going to read to you 5 very short spurts of dialogue, each one from a very different character. And so what I want you to do is play along with the speaker. Just close your eyes. Close your eyes, and as I read each of these lines of dialogue, I want you to visualize this character in your head. Just whatever you can determine about the character just from this short line of dialogue, about their gender, their age, their socioeconomic background, their level of education, where they were born, where they were raised, what their gender is. See if you can determine how much of that stuff you can determine just from a short line of dialogue. So here's the first one. I aim to kill the varmint. I aim to kill the varmint. Next one. He don't like me none. He don't like me none. Third one. Is he not wonderful? Is he not wonderful? Next one. Have you tea? Have you tea? And the last one. You're such a dork. You're such a dork. So all right, go ahead and open your eyes. So 5 very distinctly different characters, aren't they? And not a single line of dialogue here was more than 6 words long. So that's how much you can establish about your character just by picking an appropriate speech style for your character. Also to notice in these, there isn't a single word that I've butchered the spelling to sort of emulate an accent. And they're all real words. They're not made up stuff. And not a lot of slang. Maybe dork. I don't know. But for the most part, this is just word choice, pure word choice. And so think about that when you're developing the speech styles of your characters. So number 3, give each character a flaw that the reader can understand. Okay, we are all flawed people. And so if you were to build a character for your hero that doesn't have any flaws, then it's not going to come across real to your reader. And even if you do manage to create a realistic character that doesn't have any flaws, your reader's going to have a hard time relating to that character because we're all flawed. And so the flaws are important because the flaw often becomes the source or the topic of your character's arc. And we're going to talk about character arcs a little later, but your main character should change in some way as a result of the events in the story, in some meaningful and permanent way. And usually that is overcoming one of their flaws that you've built into their character. And there can be a variety of different kinds of flaws. Chase Morgan, for example, his past mistakes, both personal and professional, have caused him to look back on his life and consider himself to be a failure. And also, as a character in his late 50s, he is not a paragon of physical strength and stamina, so often this shakes his confidence. He's around a lot of younger people. And so this is something that he has to struggle with. And his character arc is kind of bent around this whole getting over his past failures. Jack Snyder is the base director of my lunar base. And he is very ambitious, and his ambition and his focus on his own reputation tend to blind him to what's truly important. So he's kind of appearances are more important than reality kind of a guy, and that gets him into trouble from time to time. Stan Brower, my security chief, the guy with the gray eyes, I gave him space sickness. So he becomes completely incapacitated with vertigo every time he steps out beyond the solid walls of the lunar base. And so naturally, this would not be a meaningful flaw to give him unless my plot forces him outside those walls, right? So obviously I do. And so you want to make sure that the flaws that you give your characters are flaws that they will have to deal with. Pick a flaw that will make your character's task harder, make their journey toward their goal harder as a result of their flaws. So Michelle Fairchild, she's a material science intern from Mars Tech. She's shy and she's inexperienced. So we've got some emotional flaws. We've got some, in her case, a sort of she's early in her professional development. So that's something for her to overcome. Kelly Baker from book 2, she's my pink-haired teenager. She's rebellious. She's irresponsible. She has a tendency to make self-destructive decisions. So she's got this sort of attitude, the typical teen attitude that is a flaw that she has to learn to overcome. I mentioned that her little brother has a physical handicap, so that's a flaw that he is going to have to deal with through the story. So all different kinds of flaws that you can get. They don't have to all be mental, they don't have to all be emotional, they don't have to all be physical, but just a variety of flaws, and every main character in the book should have some. So. Number 4, give each character a special skill that she'll find useful at some point during the story. So Chase Morgan, he's an accident investigator, so his skill naturally is investigating accidents. And so his story begins with the crash of a spaceship on the moon's surface. And so he has to go out there and he has to put this together, and the crash happens to kill the United States Secretary of Energy, so it becomes a big political incident. And so giving him this skill allows me to give my reader a view into the investigative aftermath of a significant accident event. And so so your skills, whatever you give your character, is sort of an opportunity to let your reader into that aspect of life, whether it's a hobby or whether it's a profession or whatever it is. It gives your reader a view into that. Kelly Baker from Venus Rain, she is a planetary science student, and her skill is chemistry. She's very good at chemistry, and what she does with her skill is she ends up at a point in time in the story, she breaks into a chemical storeroom and she steals a few bottles of some very basic chemicals, and she uses those individually and in combination to MacGyver herself out of a variety of tight situations. And so that's kind of fun along the way. But it does something else too. The book is about the terraforming of Venus. That's why they are there, is for the terraforming of Venus. And that's what the conflict is about. It's about who's going to own Venus by the time it's all over. And so giving Kelly this particular skill allows me to present some hypothetical chemistry of planetary terraforming, which I'm hoping that my science fiction readers will find as interesting as it is speculative. So some points about that, however, are that when you present your character's skill, you should present that at a technical level that the reader can understand. That's one. Second, you should only present the aspects of that skill that are important at that particular moment in the story. Otherwise, you're going to drag them into these long technical sidebars that really are just digressions from the story, and you don't want to do that. That's not what it's about. So you want to keep the presentation of the skill relevant and at an appropriate technical level. Number 5. Give each character a definable personality. What is your character like? Is she optimistic, pessimistic, grumpy, funny, flirtatious, adversarial? What does she get fired up about? Is it the environment, animal rights, poverty, duty, honor, love, hatred, vengeance? Let's face it, without a definable personality and a passion for something, your character is going to be boring. Also, how does your character respond to frustration? This is an important question. Your plot is a series of events that is designed to frustrate your character's efforts to achieve her goal. How's she going to respond? How will she react? Will she get angry, resourceful, determined, depressed? Will she get even? Will she give up? If she gives up, she's probably not your hero, but you may have another character in the story who gives up. Maybe somebody that your hero has to save as a result or get back on the right track. So will she seek help? Will she pray? So I'm not suggesting that your character should respond to every circumstance in exactly the same way. But as human beings, we are sort of predisposed toward natural emotional responses, certain emotional responses to frustration. And so your character should be as well. Number 6, give each character an identifying line, mannerism, or prop. So this is just something that your reader can associate with your character besides just a physical description. It will help to individualize the character, and it will also help to remind your character, your reader, of who that character is. Oh yeah, he's the one with a cup of coffee. Yeah, I remember that. He's the one with the cane or whatever. And so here's some examples. They can be just about anything that you can imagine. Chase Morgan has an identifying line. His identifying line is, you have to know what you're up against before you know what to do. And ironically, he never actually speaks these words in this form, but these words appear in his thoughts in the very first scene of the book. And it sort of establishes this as his line. And then later in the book, he speaks similar lines in conversations when he says things like, we have no idea what we're up against, or let's find out what we're up against. And so this becomes a thread of consistency for this character, an element of realism. Another one is Jack Snyder, the bass director. He tends to use what I'm going to call auditory phrases. He says things like, listen up, or you hear me. He tends to use them when he's agitated, which is most of the time. And so that, again, that is an element of consistency in his speech style. Identifying mannerisms. Colonel Chang, the villain in Book 2, Venus Reign, he has this tendency to just sort of hold his arm out parallel to the floor, and he rotates his wrist like this. That's kind of a nervous habit. Now, how would I come up with one of a mannerism like that's kind of an odd thing, isn't it? I actually knew a guy who did this. I worked with him for a while, and I noticed him doing this in the meetings, and I asked him about it one time. I says, where did you get that habit? And he said, well, it all stemmed from elbow surgery. He was on a cruise ship, and he fell down a flight of stairs, and it broke his elbow. And he said what he had to do was, after the surgery, he had to do this during his healing period to keep the bones from fusing during the healing. Well, this was years before. And he no longer needed the therapy, but he retained this as a habit that he didn't even realize he was doing until somebody brings it up. So that's pretty cool. So that's where you can come up with a lot of these ideas. Get them from people you know. Get them from things that you see. You know, I'll often adopt a physical description of either somebody I know or somebody famous or whatever. Chase Morgan, I kind of adopted his physical description from Morgan Freeman. That's also where his name comes from. But then I pull a personality trait from somebody else I know, a mannerism from somebody else that I know. And so you don't have to come up with these all on your own. You can just observe people and you come up with a lot of great ideas. So in Colonel Chang's case, it was this chemical explosion that gave him the scarring on the side of his face. Same thing, it shattered his elbow and he had to do the same thing. But what's cool about it is that it gives me a way to demonstrate, at least to show some of his emotions in a way that is very specific and very unique to that particular character. Identifying props. You don't have to restrict yourself to just one kind of identifier per character. I gave Chase the identifying line. I also gave him an identifying prop. And his particular prop is a cup of coffee. This guy's got coffee with him everywhere he goes. In every single scene, he's carrying it around, he's drinking it, he's setting it down, he's picking it up. And one of my critiquers, David Corwell, for those of you who know him, he was around Southwest Writers for a number of years. He wrote in the margin, he says, I think Chase loves coffee just as much as the author does. And he was right, I had to chuckle. But the coffee disappears about 4, 5, 6 chapters into the book. It just goes away. Because that's a trivial pleasure that he no longer has time for. He's mired now in this political conflict and he's got to solve this case. Because in this particular case, the political events that are kind of expanding beyond anybody's control are leading toward interplanetary war over what he believes to be a misunderstanding of how this accident happened. But he can't prove that until he actually solves it. And so his coffee just completely goes away when he doesn't have time for that, he's not around that, he just can't do it. And so it's a way for me to show the sense of urgency, a way for me to show that he's gone beyond his comfort level. A way to show that his priorities are very, very different at this particular point in his life. And so then the coffee comes back again in the last chapter of the book when things have settled down. And so different things that you can do with your props and your mannerisms. Another prop that I want to talk about because it became more versatile than I really expected. The President of the United States, her name is Victoria Powers, I gave her a cane. Just on a whim, I gave her a cane, but she doesn't actually use it to walk. She doesn't need it to walk. She uses it to walk when the burdens of her station, of her office, become too much for her to bear. You'll see her subconsciously starting to use the cane to walk. But she uses this thing normally more as kind of a badge of office, like a scepter. You know, so she carries this around and she'll use it, she'll bang it on the floor to bring order to a meeting, or she'll stretch it out in front of somebody to get their attention without having to say anything. She taps her wedding ring on it when she's nervous. She grips it tightly when she's tensed. You see her knuckles get white. And so this became a way that I could show just a wide variety of her emotions that is in a way that's very unique to this character just through this one prop that I've given her. So think about that, different props. lines and mannerisms that you can give for your characters. You should introduce these early, probably the first time that you introduce the character, so they immediately make this mental connection between your character and their identifier. And then bring them up again, play with them, mention them in various ways every time that the character appears, or nearly every time the character appears, and it will help them to keep the characters straight in their mind, as well as helping to make them unique and individual. Number 7, give each character virtues, especially your hero. Okay, your hero, your reader needs to like your hero, because your reader should care about your hero, should want her to achieve her goal. Because if your reader doesn't care, if you care about your reader, if your reader doesn't care about your character, your reader's not going to care what happens to your character. Therefore, they're not going to care about the story. Now, there are a few authors out there who can pull off a main character that the reader doesn't like. In that case, they have to go for, they want the reader, they want the hero to succeed because they like the people the hero's trying to save. But that's pretty hard to pull off. And so generally speaking, you want your reader to like your hero. So you should give your reader something that they can latch onto very, very early in the book. And that opening scene with Nick Mirren and the old lady over the jug of honey, the primary purpose of that scene was not only to introduce the character Nick Mirren, but also to give the reader a couple of things to like about him. So what did you guys pick up on? Anything in that makes him a likable character? He didn't want to take advantage of. That was the big one right there, is that he recognized he could talk her down to 2 copper pieces, right? Why didn't he?
She wouldn't have enough money.
She needed the money. He wanted to leave her money to live on. He says, you know what, I can take this. It's, probably not gonna. She's probably not going to lose money at 2 copper, but it's not going to give her any profit either. And so that was the main thing there. I stopped the reading before the end of the scene, but it goes on. He walks a little further down the aisle, and he runs into a group of kids playing sticks or swords with sticks, and so his reaction to those kids reveals that he likes kids. And generally speaking, readers will like heroes who like kids. And so I gave him that, and then the next thing that happens is he meets his best friend, so he gets to see him interacting with his best friend. So it's basically getting the reader an opportunity to learn his personality and learn who this guy is before he becomes mired in crisis. And the point there is to give them several things that they can latch onto, something for them to like. Now, Venus Rain was a little bit of a challenge because the hero there, Kelly Baker, she's rebellious, she's promiscuous, and irresponsible. She lives life at odds with her single mother. She dates an older man. She wears her clothes and her hair in a manner that the reader might not approve of. She enjoys a legal drug that she insists is benign, and she subscribes to lust over love. So she's got a long laundry list of demons that are really not that uncommon to varying degrees in the teenage population. So it helps to make her real, but this is an awful lot for her to overcome, isn't it? I got to really give the reader something to latch onto to say, you know what, I care because she's worth saving. And so I gave her a couple of things. The first thing I gave her was what I feel is a sense of, what's the word I'm looking for? She has potential. So she is a planetary science student. She does not attend her classes very much because she is rebellious and she just doesn't care. But yet she's doing well in school, and these are very technical topics, and so she knows the material, and so she's very smart, she's very bright. So the reader gets the sense that if she can just get through this phase of her life, she could really do something with it. She could really go somewhere. She's got a lot of potential. But I didn't feel that was enough. Certainly not personal enough for that. So I gave her little brother. And so her parents got divorced when she was 9 years old, and her mother was pregnant with her son, and so he was born after the divorce. They started out on Venus Rain, a space station orbiting Venus, and the father took off. He went literally to Jupiter, and so he did. He's there. He might show up again in book 5, but so he took off to Jupiter to work for the Union there, and the mother, in order to keep the family afloat financially, had to pick up extra shifts at work. So she's been working 2 shifts, often on the planet's surface when her family's up on the space station, and so she wasn't around much. So who's taking care of the little brother? Kelly is. How old's Kelly at this point in time? 9 years old. So 10 by the time he's born. So she's sitting here taking care of this kid that she is way too young to be taken care of. And she's made her mistakes along the way, but what I'm able to show the reader in the very first chapter of the book is that when he gets into trouble, and he is literally his life is at risk, she drops everything and puts her life on the line to save him. So the reader can see that her sense of responsibility, it ends right there, right where her little brother. When it comes to taking care of her little brother, she's right there. And so that's the other thing that I gave her to make her the reader see that she is worth saving. And then, of course, her objective to survive and possibly even overcome Colonel Chang, who has hijacked the whole station, he and his crew, is a goal that then the reader will then be able to buy into. So, as far as virtues, don't forget your villains. So even the bad guys, most bad guys don't consider themselves to be the bad guy. Whatever they're doing it for a reason. And so the reader, even though you may not want them to like your villain, the reader should understand your villain, should understand why he's doing the things he's doing. Now, it may be simply that he is a sociopath and he can't help himself, but most of the time it's something different. It's something more than that. And in the case of Colonel Chang, he's a military character, and so he is doing what he's doing at the bidding of his commander-in-chief. And so the reader, they may not want him to achieve his goal. They better not want him to achieve his goal, but they should understand why he's doing it. And so don't forget your villains when you're thinking about virtues. Next one, and this one is incredibly important. Know your character's backstory. Okay, it is your character's backstory. It is their past that is going to make them the person that they are in your story's present. And if you do not know your character's past history in far more detail than you will ever portray on the page, then you're not going to consider them to be real. You're not going to think of them as a real person. And if you don't think of them as a real person, certainly they're not going to come across to your reader as a real person. So you should know everything there is to know about your character's past. You should know where they grew up. You should know where they live. You should know who their family is, how many kids and siblings that they have. You should know what their childhood traumas were. You should know what their childhood successes, their triumphs were, their childhood failures that were significant in their life. You should know all of these things, what their interests are, whether you mention them or not, because it's going to come across in one way or another on the page. For example, if you got a character who's driving down the street and you're going to describe this street, what is your character interested in? What is his interest? If he's interested in architecture, you're going to describe the buildings. If he's interested in cars, you're going to describe those. If he's interested in gardening, you're going to describe the landscaping. If he's a police officer who's looking for a suspect or a confidential informant, he's going to notice the people and what they're doing. And so how you describe this street, which details you choose to put on the page, is going to be very dependent upon who your character is and what their interests are. And you may never say that your character is interested in architecture, but because you know he is, then you're going to be consistently throughout the book pointing out little neat details of architecture that he happens to notice. And so if you are describing one scene in terms of the architecture, the next setting in terms of the cars, and the next setting in terms of the people, without any indication on the page of why he's noticing different things every time he goes different places, then that's going to come across as inconsistent. And your reader may never understand why. They sort of get this sense of phoniness to the character, but they're going to feel it anyway. So you need to know that character's past just as well as you can. Develop that. Spend some time developing that. Number 9, interview the character. Get to the root, the cause, the source of every single trait that you have decided for that character up to this point, and that you will decide beyond this point. Ask them, hey Chang, how'd you get that weird mannerism? How'd you get that scarring on your face? And listen to how they respond. Let them tell you their story. You'll begin to hear their voice. And you can use that to help develop their style of speech. So interview them and ask them about every single trait that you've developed for the character. Ask them how they got that. What's the history behind that? And so for Kelly and her mom, I had to develop, this rift that is apparent between them, and I needed to understand that in far more detail than I will ever put on the page. Because doing so is what will allow you to portray them in a way that is consistent beyond even what you're realizing as you're writing the character. Number 10, know how your character will change throughout the story. This is your character's arc, and this is especially important for your hero, but you don't need to restrict it to just the hero. You can have other characters that change as well. But your hero should overcome something in their character. They should be a better person by the time the story is done, whether they achieve their goal or not. And because this is going to be determined really whether or not your reader is satisfied with the ending. They can be satisfied with the ending if your character doesn't achieve their goal, as long as the character is ennobled in some way by the effort. And so this should be, this is probably going to come back to one of the character flaws that you've defined. If they do not overcome something and become a better person, then the stakes in your plot are probably either not personal enough or they're not severe enough in order to warrant that change. And so you need to make sure that they are. You need to ratchet them up if they're not, and then you need to demonstrate this change in your character by the end of the story. Number 11, make your villain stronger than your hero. You don't want it to be a foregone conclusion that your hero is going to win. So that's the points of character development. At this point, you've got all of your characters, at least a scarecrow of them defined. And then you want to go back at this point and just look for some of the pitfalls that you might have made along the way. The first is make sure that every character's personality is different than every other character. So go back and look at them and make sure that's true, because if every character has a personality like yours, or is a personality that is the way you perceive yours to be, then they're not going to come across as real. So even if you have built, let's say you're writing a science fiction dystopia, even if you've got a society that discourages individualism, okay, you're in the heads of your characters. They still need to have their own personality, their own ambitions, their own desires, their own interests, even if they cannot express those outwardly in their culture. So they all need to be different, or none of them are going to seem real. Next one, and this one was a big one for me in my first book, make your hero strong-willed. I think it was about the fourth draft of the book when I hired somebody to do a professional critique of the book, and I got back a rather long laundry list of things that I had done wrong in the writing. This is the list of things that I had done wrong in the writing. So I wish I'd have had this book before, but it was this critique that convinced me that I needed to learn to write, and that's when I started to come to this group here. And I attended every talk I could get my hands on, read every book I could get my hands on, went to every conference that I could possibly get to and afford. But one of the big ones that was a thread through the entire book was that my hero was just too much of a watcher and not enough of a doer. And so one of my future drafts was a pass through the entire manuscript looking for nothing else other than how can I make this guy more of a doer and less of a watcher. And so just one example of a scene that I did that in, there's a scene kind of late in the book where he and about a half a dozen other folks, military people, law enforcement people, are in a truck. They're in a transport on the moon's surface, and they're driving across the surface, and they got a group of guys, bigger group of guys, in an identical truck behind them, chasing them across the moon's surface. And in the original book, Chase was not in the driver's seat. He was one of several passengers that were shooting back at the bad guys. And so he was helping out in his own way. But in trying to make him more of a doer and less of a watcher, in this extra pass through the book, I swapped seats. And so what does that do? That puts him in the driver's seat now, and he's not stopping and asking people, hey, should I go left here? Should I go right here? What should I do? He is in charge, and he ain't asking anybody, and it's his actions right there that more than any of the others is going to determine whether or not any of them survive. And so it changed, it just ratcheted up the level of tension and the level of emotion in the book, as compared to him just being one of several people shooting back at the bad guys. And so my point here is take every opportunity literally and figuratively, to put your character in the driver's seat. If your hero does not care enough about his goal to assert himself to achieve it, then why should your reader care enough to read about it? Next one, remove any cliched character traits. So if you've got, a dumb blonde or a mad scientist or a brutish albino hitman or a crooked sheriff or any one of dozens of other character types that have been done to death in books and movies, identify that now and start making some changes. So if you got a dumb blonde, make her not dumb, make her not blonde, or make her not a her, or change something so that she's not that cliche character. So consider a Western with a stereotypical crooked sheriff. He rules the town by fear. He takes bribes from criminal elements. He has the judge in his back pocket. So that's stereotypical. So what do? So what I do, and I do this for everything. I do it for character traits. I do it for plot. I do it for, whatever. Just about any step of the process, I can use what I call the suppose method or the what if method. I just sort of say what if this, what if that, what if the, just a way to sort of spur some brainstorming. So I said, okay, so he's a crooked sheriff. I need him to be crooked to serve his purpose in the book. And so what if I make him not a sheriff? What if I make him suppose he's the deputy? Well, he's still a lawman. So that's not much of a change, but I have to ask myself at this point, is he still in a position of sufficient authority to serve his purpose in the book? If he's a minor player, he probably is. If he's not, then making him not the sheriff might take him out of a position of sufficient authority. Unless, suppose the sheriff is not there. Suppose the sheriff is gone a lot. Suppose he's out spending a lot of his time at outlying ranches trying to, resolve an ongoing cattle rustling problem. Suppose that my crooked deputy has created that problem to get the sheriff out of town. That would be interesting. But why then would the sheriff go instead of sending the deputy? Suppose the deputy is scared of horses. Suppose that would be non-stereotypical for a Western lawman, wouldn't it? That's my goal here, right? Make it not stereotypical. But I got to justify it, right? You have to justify all of this stuff through their background, or they're not going to come across as real. So, well, suppose he's not afraid of horses. Suppose he's just saying he is. That's not very interesting. We'll throw that one in the not every idea is a good idea category. Suppose that he had an accident as a kid. Fell off a horse. It'd have to be a pretty severe accident, wouldn't it? Suppose that he hit his head really hard, and suppose that he actually developed a form of brain damage that prevents him from remembering numbers. That's very specific. I like that. We like specific. That's good. Where would I come up with an idea like this? Who knows? I actually heard this on a news program, one of those 60 Minutes or 2020 or something. You get ideas from anywhere. And so this one was a program, was talking about an article talking about a guy who was working on his roof with a nail gun. He fell off the roof and actually drove a 4-inch nail all the way into his skull. And they were interviewing the guy. He had been fully recovered. But ever since then, he had this weird form of brain damage that the only symptom of which was that he could never again remember a single phone number. Thought that's very specific. That's the kind of stuff I try to remember because it's unique and specific, and it's actually real. So now there aren't any phones in my Western, so it'd have to be numbers in general or something, or it'd have to be something different, some other kind of weird form of brain damage. But it would be significant enough maybe to justify his fear of horses. Now, it would only be meaningful if my plot required him to remember some important number at some point in time, right? A stagecoach arrival time, a train, a car number, or something like that. But you see how it works. You can start to twist up things and get some new ideas just from doing some what-ifs. And finally, the last pitfall: don't forget your secondary characters. This is the waitress in the coffee shop, the cab driver, the shoe shine boy. The janitor, these characters that just walk onto the page, the woman in the Cedar Falls weekend market who was selling honey, that's the only scene she appears in. So these characters that walk onto the page for a brief period of time and then walk off again and you never see them again, obviously they don't need to be as well developed as your main characters. but that doesn't mean that you should leave them as cardboard cutouts either. So what I do is I go in and I give them maybe one or two of these traits that we've talked about. Not all of them, but just one or two, just to give them a little bit of individuality, just a little bit of something that makes them not quite a cardboard cutout. And the last thing that I want to talk about is a character profile. So a character profile is just a list of information about the character. Everything that you've decided about your character, you should write down. Because if your character has blue eyes on page 6 and brown eyes on page 312 and nothing in between to explain why their eyes changed color, your reader is going to catch it. You may not. You're awfully close to it. You've read through it too many times. You get too many details to remember, but your reader is going to catch it, and you're going to get emails. So write down everything every decision you make about your character, from their name, their gender, their age, their health, their appearance details, their identifying lines, mannerisms, and props that you chose, a description of their style of speech, their education, their occupation, their employment history, their job status, marital status, their family, kids, grandkids, grandparents, nieces, uncles, any of that, just so even if you never mention them, you should know who they are, so that if you do mention them, you can be consistent. And you know what? If you haven't decided that they have these, you're never going to mention them. But if you decide ahead of time that they do have these, you know what? There may be a point in the story where it's appropriate for them to think about their family. And so that's another one of these things that's going to mean the difference between whether they come across as real or not. Where do they live? What's their address? You know, where did they grow up? Where do they work? What possessions do they have? Now, these should be important possessions, things that help to identify who they are, things that are important to them, things that you might be able to put at risk, maybe at some point during the story, that you would not think to if you had not decided ahead of time that you needed them. What skills and talents do they have? What skill deficiencies do they have? What are they not good at? That could be helpful for ratcheting up the level of difficulty of their task at some point in time. What are their religious beliefs? What are their political beliefs? What is their astrological sign, if that's important? What are their fears? What are their prejudices? Their attitudes, their childhood victories, all of this stuff. Every single detail that you make up, write it down and keep track of it and refer to it often so that you can keep them consistent. So that's what I have. Questions?